Trigger warning: this video may include discussion around topics such as sexual assault, domestic violence and physical violence. We acknowledge that this content may be difficult and encourage you to take care for your safety and well-being.
I'd like to welcome Davey Thompson from White Ribbon Scotland and Iris Kaur from Amos Abused Men in Scotland. Davey, in Scotland, there were over 50,000 incidents of domestic violence against women reported to the police in 2018 to 2019. What does that mean for your organisation?
Ultimately, what it means is it's part of the motivation for us being in existence. Our campaign at White Ribbon Scotland is to help eliminate violence against women in all its forms. So domestic abuse is one example of that, a very important example, particularly given the numbers you're quoting there. So what it does is it gives us that opportunity to raise awareness, particularly amongst men, which is our target audience. We're trying to engage men who don't perpetrate violence against women to get them to be more active in helping to end it. So we don't generally bombard people with too many statistics, but that's certainly one we use simply because it brings home the scale of the issue. And part of the problem with getting people to address violence against women is believing that you can, because it just seems such a big problem. I mean, 50,000 plus incidents are reported incidents, but when people get interviewed who are survivors of domestic abuse, it doesn't matter whether they're female, male, or from same-sex relationships, they've generally got a story to tell of how there were a lot of incidents prior to the one they chose to report. So those figures are minimal really compared to the actual level of domestic abuse in Scotland. And it brings it home to people that we're talking to when we're trying to get across the scale of the problem and the fact that there's a need for intervention. And it's a bit like convincing people that you can get to the end of a marathon line, but you have to take the first step to make it happen. So we kind of use it that way. We're not an organisation that offers services to survivors. We're a primary prevention campaign, and figures like that bring home the issue.
So how would you go about then engaging with people in order to prevent violence?
Well, our main aim is to educate men in terms of what the scale of the problem is in terms of violence against women and what it constitutes, all the different examples there are of violence against women, so that they have an understanding of what it is we address. And then we look to them to say, right, well, what is it about men's behaviour or attitudes that could change, which would result in an improvement, result in making abusers more aware that what they do is not condoned by other men, that type of thing. So that, you know, it's little things. It's just like speaking out in the first place, being prepared to say openly that you oppose violence against women, because there's not enough men saying that out loud. There's not enough young boys and girls growing up hearing that from the men in their lives. So it's about engaging with the men about what they think they can do, and then expanding on that and you know, giving them more ideas about what they can do. And one of the ways we try to engage them in the first place is through what we call White Ribbon status projects. So this is where an organisation or an area or you know, like could be a sports club, could be a religious group, it could be all sorts of different organisations, colleges, universities, local community council led groups, all sorts of different groups. And what they do is they engage in a project with us to gain an award of White Ribbon status, to recognise the work that they're doing to involve more men in addressing violence against women. So that gives us the opportunity to have men volunteering to be part of that.
Now, Iris, in Scotland, there were over 10,000 incidents of domestic violence against men reported to police in 2018-19. And what does that mean for your organisation?
Lots of work. That's what it means for our organisation, lots of work. Amos is a very small organisation. There's myself, who's 4 days a week. We have a helpline support officer who's 3 days a week, and an admin worker who does 10 hours a week. We have one person who volunteers on the helpline, and he does 1 day a week. So that's the entire staff for supporting male victims of domestic abuse from AMIS. I mean, there are other organisations, there's some local authorities that do some support work with men, and there's a couple other organisations, for instance, Fear Free, which used to be Fearless. They support male victims of domestic abuse. What we do is support men that call us who have been victims of domestic abuse. Some of them just call and they want that initial conversation, some are questions answered, and then they go away. Some of them, lots more of them these days, want to call you again each time they reach a new stage in their journey to a life without violence, or a life without abuse. And so they call a number of times. Generally, where figures work out at around about sort of 300, 350 men on file at any given time, and maybe 3 times that, a bit more than that. It's actually getting to be a bit more than that in sort of callbacks, men that are calling back more than once. So that kind of gives you an idea of the numbers that we're able to deal with. It doesn't touch that 10,000. It doesn't touch that 10,000, but we're doing the best we can. So that's kind of what it means to us.
Well, Davey, can you tell us then what it means to wear a white ribbon?
Well, quite simply, it's a show of support for the idea of eliminating violence against women. So we'll ask men to wear a white ribbon if they've taken the White Ribbon Pledge, which is part of our campaign. So there's a pledge that we ask them to take to say that they would not commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women. And then we invite them to wear a white ribbon to show that they've done that. So those are the kind of 2 main reasons why people wear one. Essentially, it's also a conversation starter. The only way you change attitudes in society is if people are talking about it. So, I remember people at the time of the smoking ban saying, this is never going to work. You're never going to tell a pub full of people that they can't smoke. And the next night, people were standing outside the pub smoking instead of sitting inside smoking, because most people were behind it, and most people knew most people were behind it. Most people oppose violence of all kinds, and most people oppose violence against women, but not everybody's hearing everybody say that. So having that white ribbon on can spark a conversation, and it happens to me quite regularly where, if you're in a taxi, the taxi driver will ask you, what are you wearing that for, or what is it you do, and it sparks the conversation. I've had that conversation in trains because of that, and all these types of places. Or people will maybe say, well, look, I know what the red one's for, but to do with AIDS. I know there's a pink one for breast cancer. What's the white one all about? So it just helps us spread the message a wee bit wider as well. And it gives that kind of emblem, the symbol behind me that already starts the message rolling before they even start.
What do you say when people ask whether or not men can experience domestic violence?
Well, what we always say is that anyone can experience domestic abuse. What can make you a victim of domestic abuse is just putting your love and your trust in the wrong person, and that's all it takes, is just putting your love and your trust in the wrong person, and you leave yourself open to the risk of domestic abuse. I always think that domestic abuse perpetrators are people who are damaged, people who have had problems, or people who have had issues which lead to this kind of behaviour. There's lots of other factors that come into it. There's been some recent work on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. There are some people who think that it's to do with, particularly for women, it's to do with women's position in society. There's lots of reasons why men become victims of domestic abuse, or the needs that they have. I suppose it's more to do with the needs that they have. Once you've become a victim of domestic abuse, there might be needs that you'll have that someone else doesn't have, and I think they vary according to your age, your sex, your ability or disability level, your cultural background. All of these things affect the support that you need when you're a victim of domestic abuse. But I think the main lesson is, as Davey says, it's wrong, and we should all call it out in every form for every victim.
Thank you. Davey, how has White Ribbon Scotland been affected by COVID?
Well, we took an early decision that we would be sticking to Scottish Government guidance on it. So we had the kind of general impact that everybody's had. We immediately said that we're not going to go to our office in Glasgow. We're not going to meet people face to face. We're not going to travel for the purposes of the campaign. And that becomes quite limiting in a lot of ways. We looked at, from an early stage, it became obvious we're probably going to have to move online. So we started that off by doing a lot of social media work and increasing our presence in social media, which is fine, but it loses that face-to-face contact. And for the type of subject matter we deal with, that can be quite tricky. If you're not doing training face-to-face, you're not necessarily picking up when somebody's maybe becoming upset by what they're talking about or that kind of thing. And we'd want to be in that position where we can be there for people that are volunteering to come and help with us. So there's small aspects like that which are really important ones. So we held off from doing online training, and because we were living in optimism that things would change. And obviously we had that period of time when it looked as if regulations could be released, reduced a wee bit, and we could get out and about. And that was fine for a little while, but it quickly became obvious that the second wave was coming and that wasn't going to be happening. So, you've alluded to the 16 days of action. So during that 16 days of action for 2020, so that's the UN-led 16 days of action to eliminate violence against women. So we went online with our training at that point. Because there've been a number of people that we've been talking to that were wanting to come on and become speakers for us, as we call them. So we put the training online. Instead of doing it as a one-day training course, it became 2.5-hour modules online. And so far that's working out okay. It's still relatively early days for it, and we're having to get used to it as well as the people we're delivering to. What we did do a lot of was development work on the status projects, because we could do that through Zoom meetings and all of this. So we were developing steering groups for new status projects. We were talking to the people that are already running projects and looking at what they could do, that type of thing. So it meant that when we did say, right, well, let's go to online training, there was people already from these projects who were wanting to come on board with it. What it's done for us in other ways is it's prevented us from holding events like we would normally do. And we had an event lined up, which we're still going to do, but it's had to be postponed. With the Hart brothers, Luke and Ryan Hart. I don't know if you know the story, people listening to this might not know it, but essentially Luke and Ryan were two sons in a family where the father was involved in running the family through coercive control, and there was their mother and their sister and the two of them. And that went on for years, and there was no physical violence involved until the day the boys got old enough to have got good jobs to help their sister and their mother move out, and then their sister and their mother were both murdered by their father. So their story emphasises that dealing with what some people might say isn't quite so important, the coercive control elements, but they're totally wrong if they're thinking that's something we shouldn't be addressing, because it's essential that gets addressed, because that's what it can lead to.
Iris, how has Amos been affected by COVID?
Well, the operational effect on the organisation is nothing compared to the effect on our clients. For the organisation, for us, we've had to sort of move online and all start working from home. That was a bit of a challenge, trying to get everybody organised so that they could provide the same services from home as we were providing from the office. Like office space, there's been some benefits because office space is expensive. Now we're thinking we could maybe manage without an office, for lots of things. We could just hire space when we need it. So, you've always got to try and find something positive, something to move you forward and motivate you. But that's been the way it's it's been for the organisation, and we've had the same issues as other organisations, with events having to be cancelled, fundraising events having to be cancelled. It's been, you know, a real challenge trying to keep the doors open and keep things moving along. For our clients, it's been a complete nightmare. People were calling, it went very, very quiet to start with. When lockdown first happened, it went very, very quiet, and it was so quiet that we were starting to worry. But then people started to call again, and what they were saying to us was that they couldn't call because they were in lockdown with their abuser, and they couldn't get to the phone, and they couldn't use their computer, so they had terrible trouble trying to get a hold of us. And our figures later showed us that, yes, were casework clients who already had a framework in place for contacting us and a method of safely contacting us. Those numbers didn't drop, those numbers went up. But the numbers for new clients went down really dramatically, and we were worried about the men that we knew should have been calling us but weren't. But eventually the numbers climbed up, almost doubled over the summer. In fact, more than doubled on our average month, more than doubled over the summer, the numbers of new clients that were calling us. And the cases, each case is much more complex. They've got many more needs that need to be addressed. One client that I was speaking to, he was leaving his partner. He was fortunate enough that he had somewhere to go, but he was shielding at the time because of a long-term condition that he had. So trying to get that man set up in his own house with his medication and his food and, you know, all of the other support that he needed was a complete nightmare trying to get him sorted out. Another chap that we were speaking to was an NHS worker, and he left his wife. She was arrested by the police, and there was no bail conditions put in place, so he had to flee. He was locked in the bedroom when he phoned us, and he had to flee, and we had to speak to a few landlords, private landlords that we knew, to try and get him somewhere to go, because at that point it was terrible trying to get a hold of the emergency housing departments. But luckily we managed to get him fixed up with something. But he just couldn't believe how lucky he was just to be able to get us and get these problems solved, get these issues addressed. There was quite a rush of very, very complex, very difficult issues to be solved for most of the people that were calling us.
Yeah, and I think it's like a lifeline for people, isn't it? And obviously, you know, as you're saying, COVID has, you know, increased a lot of it, made it a lot more complex for people. And I think there's probably a lot of that we'll still to see in the time to come, you know, post-COVID as well, I think, you know. So on the other, sort of looking at the future then, Davey, what are your hopes for the future?
Well, the first hope is that we develop as an organisation and we get bigger. Like Iris is saying about Amos, we're very short in staff. We effectively have, well, last year it would have been 1.4 members of staff. We've now got 1.6 because we managed to get a wee bit extra funding, which, as you say, always proves a little bit difficult. So I would prefer we were an organisation that had more workers that could reach out to the communities. But within that staffing level that we've currently got, we're either running or in the process of developing up to about 20 or so status projects across Scotland. And so we've shown that there's an interest there. We've shown that there's a need for us. There's shown that people want to get involved. And the change will come from local communities like that, when we can get local populations, either, you know, as I say, within an organisation's outlook or within an area outlook geographically. That's where you get the change in attitudes, because people then know that in their community there's people expressing that they want things to change, and it diminishes the position that the abuser has to continue doing what they do. And we would, I mean, we've always recognised the fact that you know there is abuse the other way around, and that men are abused. But what we're trying to address is about getting more men involved in violence against women, across the board, not just in domestic abuse. But we recognise that, and we hope that if we are successful in what we are doing, it's bound to have kind of an effect the other way, because abuse in general is going to be talked about more. So hopefully it'll have that spread where, you know, we will diminish the actual figures, because the crime figures haven't changed dramatically over, you know, the last couple of decades or so. You know, they're going up, and there's various reasons looked at for that. In some cases, you know, it's people feeling more confident that there are services to come and get support from while you're making your complaints. But you know, in other cases it could be that you know, some of it's because it's on the increase a wee bit, but the overall figures as statistically haven't changed dramatically. So the needs there to actually make a difference that brings those figures down, because prevention work starts succeeding. And it's always very difficult, and I understand very much the difficulty for people who are in a position where they're offering funding. It's very difficult to say, right, well, we're currently providing money to people who are providing services, but we also need to be providing money to people who are providing prevention campaigns. And it's very difficult to do that, because the tendency is to say, well, it's all part of the one pie, and if you take from, you'll have to take from one if you want to get the other going. And that's not acceptable. We're not looking for that to happen at all. We're looking to find funding which will support a prevention campaign whilst the very necessary services are still running. So as an organisation, we want to get bigger, we want to get better at what we do. We've been running for about 10 years. There's been a lot of experience now built into the projects that we do, and they change all the time, because every group that we get involved with come up with new ideas about how we can do things, and that's always good. So the hope would be that if we can run that kind of number of projects with the people we've got, if we had 3 or 4 outreach workers, potentially we could be running 3 or 4 times as many projects across Scotland and making a real difference to attitudes and behaviours. So it's all about trying to get to the point where we see success in terms of the actual crime figures, but we're not going to see that until we get to changing the attitudes and behaviours that tend to condone it in the first place. So it's a difficult equation, and we need to look forward to that. You're not going to see massive changes in 2 or 3 years' time. You're going to see them in 20 years' time. And we need to be big enough to cope with that and keep it running up till then.
Thanks, Davey, for that. Iris, then, what are your hopes for the future?
Well, during the last year, we've looked at what's gone on. We've tried to learn from what's happened, and we've tried to look at ways in which we can improve the way we deliver our services. And it's difficult to look any further ahead than about 3 years. Well, think about it, you know, like December 2019, who would have thought we would have been in the lockdown that we were in sort of March, April 2020. So it's difficult to plan. But we're thinking in terms of a plan for the next 3 years where we'll get a bit more staff in. I help on the helpline just now, but if we can free my time up, I'll be able to recruit volunteers, train them up for the helpline, and I'll be able to recruit other volunteers who we're thinking about calling we're local hero volunteers, because what we need to do is get closer to people. We need to get into the areas where the support is needed. It's needed in most areas in Scotland, all areas of Scotland, all local authority areas that are male victims, but in some more than others. So we need to get into each area. We need to be helping people who are in different types of cultural communities, different demographics for age, different demographics for the other support that they need. So we need to be looking at that. We need to be looking at organisations that are giving other support, because we like to think that we can be like a one-stop shop. A male victim of domestic abuse will come to us, and then we'll be able to say to him, right, we can give you the emotional support you need, and we can give you the direction that you need, but you need to get somebody from this organisation for that, someone from this organisation for that, someone to help you with your debt, someone to help you with their housing, someone to help you with your relationship with your children. And we need to know organisations that can do that in all of the local authority areas in Scotland if we can. So that's, and we've not a hope of getting the funding that's needed to pull that off. So we're going to do it with volunteers with a bit of luck, So we're going to start that in April. The new financial year, we'll get the funding through to get me off the helpline, and I'll be able to start recruiting volunteers and really making a difference in people's local areas where they live.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for taking part today. It's been really informative and really inspirational.
If you or someone you know has been affected by issues covered in this video, please see the contact for the relevant organisation for information, advice and support.